And Aaron needs a lot of time to talk to y'all, so I want to get going. If I haven't met you in person, my name is Andrew Glenn. I'm the designated broker here at MyHomeGroup. I have been the designated broker since 2020. Before that, managing broker, and before that, regular old real estate agent, just selling real estate out there. So I've done every part of the business, every aspect of the business. I've done it, seen it, touched it, lived it, cried about it, all those things. So what I want to talk about today and why we're here is because of the NAR settlement. I don't know if everybody saw the update. They've submitted that forward. The judge has conditionally approved it, and it looks like there's going to be a hearing in November to finalize that. The practice points will still, again, I'm not sure how we're going to accomplish this goal. I don't know. I still haven't seen any mechanisms how we're going to do this, but the practice changes have to happen by mid-July. So I don't know what Armless is going to do, how they're going to do that. I haven't seen any guidelines on that. So, but these practice pointers are coming, and that's where we're going to get started. I want to get started with what does that settlement say? What does it mean to you guys? First and foremost, if you're an NAR member, if you were an NAR member in 2022, card carrying member, you're free of liability. So there is no liability for you. That's part of the settlement. Caveat to that is if you were in Missouri in 2022 and you're part of one of those companies that was initially named in the lawsuit and it's not settled out, then you're not free of liability. If you're in Arizona this whole time, you're probably fine. It doesn't include brokerages that did over $2 billion. We're not globally free of liability, so that would include MyHomeGroup for 2022. So we still have some navigation to do, but our agents are free of liability. So that is good news for you guys. That's one of the main things that I don't think was communicated very well to the agents when that settlement came out. I don't know if any of you guys know, but I'm an NAR director. So MyHomeGroup is one of the top 40 largest brokerages in the country. So I get an NAR director seat. And I had no knowledge that this settlement was coming out. So you guys got it the same time I got it. And as you can imagine, my email, my phone instantly blew up with asking for opinions on what I thought about it. And my answer was, I don't know. I haven't been able to read it. I just saw the email the same time you did. Obviously, they did that for liability and disclosure purposes. They couldn't announce the settlement was coming out. They were working on the settlement. There was ongoing litigation, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the first point. NAR members, you're not liable. So that's good news, right? What are the two main practice points that have to change? First and foremost, offers of compensation cannot be included in any MLS. So that means you can't put what the co-broke is. You can't advertise it. You can't advertise it through any aspect. So last time we did this in Chandler, we had a lot of people ask, well, can I put it in Align Showings? Can I put it XYZ? Absolutely not. It cannot be anywhere. It will be an immediate violation.
And no links? Like no in links. Private comments?
Mm-hmm. Okay. No links that take you to another site that shows compensation if it's provided through the MLS. They will police that heavily and fine heavily because that is how they're getting out of being liable in these lawsuits, and they don't want to have anything to jeopardize that. So that's first and foremost. Funnily enough, and I talked about this last time, a brokerage in of itself. So if MyHomeGroup had the technical capability, and I don't know that any brokerage out there has this capability. It's just, I don't think any broker has its own internal IT staff that could 24/7 monitor listings and keep them compliant. But as a brokerage, I could put all of our listings on there and show the co-broke. I just can't advertise other brokerages co-broke. I can advertise mine. So on your websites, as long as it's not a direct feed from MLS, you can advertise, hey, there's a co-broke here. You can put a sign in your yard, co-broke offer. It just specifically says MLS is broker to broker, where I can only exclusively, I have to be a member of something to see the compensation. That's prohibited. So any MLS can't have it. But if you want a sign on your sign and on your listing that says co-broke offered, you can create that rider. There's no problem doing that. So that's a misnomer that there is no co-broke. They're not taking away co-broke. They're not taking away your ability to offer a co-broke. Our listing agreements are going to be perfectly valid. If you sign them in June, they'll be perfectly valid in July. In July, there'll be a spot for co-broke. in our listings. It's still going to be perfectly valid. There's nothing changing in that aspect. Now, will AAR change the listing agreement to include some of this verbiage? Probably. But this is also one of the reasons why MyHomeGroup created that pre-listing disclosure, so that we can verify that we had that conversation about co-broker. There's pros and cons to that. I believe that's the way it's going to go. Like, they're going to create some form of seller advisory, like there's a buyer advisory. I can't speak to that 100%. I haven't seen anything, but that's kind of the way I feel the wind's going to blow. So that's why we have that. That's why it's there. Yes?
Are we allowed to call and ask the other agent what the co-broker is?
100%. 100%. We're going to get into that when we talk about the negotiation aspects of all this, but that's the way it's going to happen. You're going to have, the only way to find out is you're going to pick up a phone and call and say, is there co-broke, is there not co-broke? And that leads me to the second practice change. The second practice change, if you're a card-carrying member of NAR and you're a member of an MLS, have to, on every single transaction, have to have a buyer, some form of buyer agreement. Not a buyer, not an agency disclosure, a buyer agreement. Like a list, just like you have to have a listing to sell someone's house, you're gonna have to have a buyer agreement to work with them as a buyer. How are we gonna police that? As an industry, I don't know. MyHomeGroup, we're gonna make it required. As an industry, I don't know. It's not gonna be a Department of Real Estate requirement, and that guidance hasn't come out. How is the MLS gonna verify it? I'm not sure. I'm really not sure how that's all gonna happen. Again, I haven't seen any guidance, so it's kind of, it's really, really scary to me to know that these changes are coming in 60 days. As a nation, this is going to change, and we don't have any guidance on how we're supposed to handle it. Yes?
So on that, so like the buyer broker kind of deal. Obviously there's different co-brokes for different transactions sometimes. So are you saying we have to have a different buyer broker essentially with every single offer?
You're going to have a buyer employment agreement, whether that's global or whether that's perk. So AAR has drafted two. One is exclusive, one is non-exclusive. Exclusive is the one I would suggest because that covers you for any transaction. Non-exclusive is per property. So I don't know if those are officially going to come out, but that's what they've proposed. So if you have a buyer who doesn't want to sign a global buyer broker, I probably wouldn't work with them, but if you want to work with them and you have a specific property that you're going to offer on, you have to have a buyer agreement for that. Have to up front. This is just like an ABD. This is just like any kind of consent to limited representation. It has to be decided upon before you write a purchase contract. You have to have this. They have to know who's paying them or how are we getting paid. Is it them? Is it the listing brokerage? Is it the seller? Who's paying them? They have to know up front.
Okay, so when we call and they say yes, they are going to pay a buyer broker, do we talk numbers there in that
100%.
Conversation?
Yeah.
Okay, and then where do we put that? In the purchase contract somewhere? What?
So, right now there's no mechanism for that, but I would say that we have a broker-to-broker compensation agreement that I would suggest you get signed to solidify that their broker is going to pay us a contract. I'll get to the new buyer broker, like literally as I'm preparing for this class, as I'm reviewing my notes, they sent me the new buyer broker draft. So I did throw it in the slides, so we'll go over what's in there. It's funny, some of the language that I suggested that we write into our buyer broker made it into this. So it's kind of cool that that's in there. But there is a sentence that says that you can put that if the compensation that's being offered does not meet what's on your buyer broker, the buyer authorizes you to negotiate that in the contract. How we do that, how we memorialize that, I'm not sure, because again, the purchase contract is between the buyer and the seller. It has nothing to do with me as a brokerage. It has nothing to do with your brokerage paying me. So it'd have to be the seller's paying me, and that's kind of sticky agency-wise. So that's something we're going to have to navigate. Again, this is a moving target. We're all, as an industry, we're all trying to figure this out together. This buyer broker agreement, the new one, does help. It does address some of the questions and concerns that people did have. But again, it's a moving target. We have 60 days to figure this out, and it's all going to happen. So I'm assuming from now until January 1, my phone's going to be blowing up. That's why I'm going on vacation. I've already looked it up. I'll let my brokers deal with this. But all kidding aside, like this is a reality. This is what's going to happen. You're going to have to make those phone calls. You have a fiduciary duty to your buyer. If you have a contract, if they have a contract with you and they're paying you 3%, and maybe they only have, maybe it's a DPA buyer, maybe it's a buyer with limited funds. You have a fiduciary duty to call and find out how do you alleviate that from them, and that's where this all comes in.
I heard that we couldn't roll it into the purchase price. Like, oh, we're gonna offer you another 5,000 to, because it's still coming from the seller.
So again, like that mechanism, like that in and of itself is not a problem, right? If I'm going to pay you 500 grand, you have it listed for 495, and five of that's supposed to pay me. There's nothing that says that the parties can't agree to do that. How do you address it that I'm paying you 500 instead of 495 so you can pay commission? That's where that mechanism for me to hold the seller accountable to that as a broker who's not a party to this contract. That's where it's sticky, and that's why you need a broker-to-broker compensation agreement. We've even created a represented seller compensation agreement. MyHomeGroup has. That's not an AR form. It's a represented seller compensation agreement to show if the seller's paying us, here's the agreement. Because one of the commissioner's rules is if you're getting paid from another party, all parties have to have that disclosed. All parties. So if I'm getting, it's like open door. If I'm getting 3% from my seller, but open doors also pay me 1%, before I agree to that, everybody has to know that and agree to that. Same thing here. If the seller is going to pay me a portion of that or all of it, everybody has to know that another party is paying my fee, not the person I'm directly under contract with. So the mechanism for that, not sure. That's why we've created that form. I'm assuming that it's going to be addressed by AAR. I haven't seen anything that's addressed that yet.
It could go in the form of concessions though, right?
So
like if it's
I
paid
want to
concession-
make this super clear. Concessions and the seller paying me directly are two different things. Yes, it can be a concession, okay? And FHA and Fannie Mae came out and said that it's not going to count. They won't count if the seller's paying the buyer's agent directly. It won't count. If it's a concession, it will count. So if you frame it as they're paying me 3% concessions, and you just that's all you say, because the concession says any buyer cost that's allowed by the lender. Representation is a buyer cost allowed by the lender. So you could just submit your buyer broker agreement to them. They could apply the 3% concessions, and the settlement statement is just X has to equal Y. It doesn't, nothing changes. But your buyer, if their buyer needed any concessions, they won't be able to get any additional concessions. If the max is 3%, if it's 6%, whatever it is, right? They can only get up to that max, even if it's including buyer compensation, if that's the way the contract is structured. If the contract is structured, they're getting 3% concessions, but the seller's paying me directly, that's a different story.
Why can't we, as a listing agent, do an agreement 6% with the seller and then do a referral fee of 3% to the buying agent?
Because it wouldn't be a referral. You're not referring that client to them, technically. They're the difference is representation. So if I'm saying it's a referral fee, then I referred someone to them for them to complete a transaction with me.
No, but they referred a buyer to my seller.
But are you representing the buyer? Are you doing limited dual agency? Because if you're not, then it's not a referral. If you're representing them, then it is a referral.
Is there a way to call it something else?
Limited dual agency either is or it isn't. So no, you couldn't do that. You couldn't do that unless they were completely unrepresented and you're just paying them for bringing someone. But everybody would have to know that and consent to that.
I mean, see how we're all just trying to figure out how we can do that. Well, idea, see what sticks.
So I mean, yes.
I mean, would NAR or the folks that filed the lawsuit, I mean, is there a problem with you as a collective group of all the brokers with all the big
Yes.
agencies? Can you get together
No.
to just,
No.
yeah. I figured-
You said the word collective.
I know the whole fight,
No.
price fixing is
As soon as you say collective, like, so we can't go start our own separate MLS and put them all there, we'd get the same lawsuit. It would be someone else would sue us for that. So that's already been established, and the settlement is specific to us not cooperating in that way. So as soon as we do that again, they're gonna sue, like, someone else, we'll get a copycat lawsuit and they'll win because we already said we wouldn't do that. So the collusion aspect of this, right? Like, I've personally never had one conversation with any other designated broker ever about what compensation was or what it wasn't or what it should or shouldn't be, ever. So the collusion aspect of that just comes from the fact that I think it was Clear Cooperation was the first target that put it on us because we had to put it on the MLS. The seller couldn't tell me, hey, I want to hire an agent, but Mr. Agent, I want you to market that exclusively off the MLS, but I do want to sign in the yard and I do want to see it on the internet. I can't do that. I don't have any capacity to do that, otherwise I get fined $500 per day if I don't list it. So that's the first problem, right? They made me do it. And second problem is the MLS says there has to be some compensation. It couldn't have been, at the time, it couldn't be zero. So that's how this whole collusion thing started. Not necessarily the fact that any of us are actually colluding, because I've never in my entire history have sent an email that's commission should be X, or why isn't it this, or you got to pay me X, or I'm not showing the house. Like that just didn't happen. So I'm sure those emails are out there, and I've seen the evidence that it was out there in this specific case. I guess, for lack of a better way of saying this, I had the privilege of doing a Zoom call with all the other brokerages that got excluded from this, including NAR's class action attorney and all this stuff, and kind of having them explain how we got here and how this was good for us, and it was very contentious. But it did show, they showed us some of the exhibits that they could not show during the trial. They showed us some of the exhibits that they had where it was companies talking, and so unfortunately a couple bad apples made it seem like the entire industry was doing this.
Exactly what happened.
So that's how we got to where we're at. If you want my honest opinion, I think in 6 months when this all filters out, I think we're all going to get paid. I think any reasonable seller, once you have that conversation about, they're going to call me anyway. So if you want to offer zero, that's totally your call. But do you want to have this many buyers, or do you want to have this many buyers? And it's up to you. And the stats are clear. Sellers have always had the ability to not offer compensation. They've always had the ability to sell for sale by owner. There's a reason they choose agents, right? There's a reason. And then if the stats were overwhelmingly that for sale by owners made more money, more people would try it. But the stats are overwhelmingly, if you use an agent, you make more money, and you make more money on top of what you paid out in commission. So
I was gonna say too, it would be, you would want to offer a buyer commission, because I then have to tell my buyer, you're gonna have to pay the commission if you buy this property, right? So it's gonna be more expensive for them. You know what I'm saying?
Well, and that's the thing, right? Is like the other conversation to have, depending on your property type, is do you really want to exclude all the VA buyers? Do you really want to exclude all the first-time home buyers who are scrapping every dollar they have to get the 3.5% or 5% for their conventional loan? Do you really want to exclude all those folks from being able to purchase your property? What do you think that's going to do to the price when you start shrinking buyer pools? Like, I think that's an easy conversation to have. One of my investors who sells a lot of houses, I had this conversation with him. I said, you can offer zero. I'm like, do you want to offer zero? We can try it. And he's like, well, why would I do that? I said, well, you can save the co-broke side. And he's like, but wouldn't that just mean people don't want to show my house? I'm like,
Yeah.
potentially, yeah, that's probably could happen. He's like, well, that doesn't make any sense to me. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. So it's a conversation that has to be had. I don't think it's a hard conversation. And here's the other thing you got to remember. Right now, if you're sitting in this room and you're uncomfortable presenting a buyer-broker agreement, just know in 6 months, every one of you is going to have that same conversation. So a buyer can't go to another agent and be like, well, you're not going to make me sign a buyer-broker. They're like, yes, I have to. Everybody has to. So that's the conversation that's going to evolve out of this. And then it's going to become a listing presentation. What do you offer? What services? What do you do for me? How much are you charging me? This agent said they do it for 4. Will you do it for this? Right? That's what it's going to come down to. It's going to come down to negotiation, but it's not going to go away. And then you're going to call them. And there's some mechanisms in this new agreement that I don't like. You're probably going to have to modify. Like one of them says that if you have 2% here and the agent pays you 3%, you have to give that point to your buyer. It says that in here. You can modify that. Again, this is a draft. It's not official. It's not done. This just came out, and I wanted to talk about it because I'm sure you guys everybody heard about it and asked me why I didn't have it in my presentation.
So you'd be better going high and going lower if you needed to, or do it.
Again, just a conversation with your buyer. Like, what are you guys comfortable doing? Know that I'm going to go try to get them to pay this. I would, I can't say there's anything standard here, Ryan. I can't say I want 3%. It's going to be buyer by buyer. But if you
can you modify, like, say that you did go high, right, you're like 4%, and then the seller's only paying 3, can you just tell your buyer, don't worry about the 1%, or are they locked in?
There's
Okay.
nothing that locks you into this, and this is an agreement, it's just like a listing, like if for some reason something changes during escrow, now I gotta pay a home warranty, or now I gotta credit the buyer, they're walking, or something like that, I can do whatever I want, this is my agreement. And my home group has never said that you guys can't, and especially, as long as at least the file fee's left over, you guys can do whatever you want with that commission, whatever's earned, right? Like, even on the buyer broker, if it comes to a situation where you've got to credit them, or it has to go down for some reason to get the deal to go through, like, you always have that flexibility. This is between you and them. That's
Will it
no
be
one
another
else.
form then, if we go down?
So they have a listing contract addendum. I'm assuming there's got to be some kind of addendum for this.
Okay.
I'm assuming they'll create
Okay.
one, but other than that, I mean, you could just draft a new one, right? And this one, in the additional terms, this replaces this one signed on that date.
Okay.
I mean, that's what you can do. So no, nothing's set in stone. This is always under your control.
Okay, sorry, so, but like, can they only sign with one buyer broker at a time?
It says that they should not do that because it's just, I could sign, if a seller wanted to right now, they could sign 10 listing agreements. Nothing's stopping them from that. What that means is they owe 10 commissions as soon as that sells. Same thing on a buyer broker. If you sign with 10 different people, buyer brokers, and half of them all of a sudden decide they're going to come after you to collect, they all have a contract that you sign saying if you purchase real estate, you're going to pay a commission of whatever it is. So, I mean, it's going to be an education for buyers as well as agents. They're all going to have to understand. And again, this is going to be a conversation industry-wide. It's not going to be just my home group. It's not going to be just you guys in this room. Everybody who goes out and shows a buyer who's a member of the MLS has to present this, has to get it signed, has to get it done.
And this is gonna protect us with open house situations, right?
This, I mean, they're under contract. That's, again, it's like you go to a listing appointment and you talk about all the things you do, what they can and can't do, what you're going to do for them. You're going to go to a buyer presentation. So everybody's going to have a buyer consultation that they're comfortable presenting, and they're going to say, here's the things you don't do. Don't go to an open house without me. Don't, if you want to see a house, see this. If you want, you're going to have to outline what your services are, what your expectations for them are, what their expectations for you are, and then you sign this agreement. They're hiring you now. They're hiring you.
Now, in the buyer broker, it says that they can, if they sign with another agent, that would nullify the buyer broker.
It says, buyer acknowledges that signing more than one buyer broker employment agreement or similar agreements for the same term and or compensation could expose the buyer to liability for additional compensation.
Is that the new one?
This is the new one. But that's
Oh, okay.
that's always been the case.
Well, line 35 through 37, I believe there's verbiage that says that if they go with another agent, they can fire you unilaterally, correct?
No. None of our contracts are unilateral. They all have to be released. The only party in either of these contracts that has the ability to cancel them unilaterally is us. We can decide not to work with someone. They can't decide to fire us. So just like in your ER, I can let someone out for cause. They can't unilaterally fire me unless they can prove cause, but they have to prove it. So if someone's just a complete jerk, you don't want to work with them anymore, you can say, I'm going to release you from this buyer broker agreement. If you're doing everything that you said you'd do in your agreement, just like if you were doing everything you said you were doing in your listing contract and they call me and say, hey, I want to cancel this, and I would say, well, why? And I just don't like them. I'm sorry, you're going to have to negotiate that with your agent because I don't see any, it looks like they were upholding the end of the bargain. And that's what we do. We get those calls probably 5 times a week, 10 times a week, something like that.
So what happens if we have a buyer broker agreement and they agree the buyer's gonna pay me 2%, 2.5%, whatever, and then it comes to the closing and then they don't? Like, what?
Well, if they're still under contract with you and they're using you and you know about it, you submit your buyer broker to the title company, and the title company has a line item and they have to settle it. It's a cost. They can't close it without settling it. It's a cost. Just like they can't close a
If
listing
they
and
didn't
not
bring
pay
all their
you,
cash to close, or like they're missing
then
money.
it just wouldn't close.
Yeah, it wouldn't close.
It wouldn't close.
And now
Yeah.
the sellers, so.
Just like a listing, if they don't have funds to pay you, to pay your commission, they have to bring the funds to close it. So
Right,
it's the
every
same concept.
Part of their closing cost.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's just going to be, That's what I keep saying, like, if the settlement statement is X marks the spot, right, we're gonna get probably to reasonably close to the same numbers we're getting to now, we're just gonna navigate it a different way. It's gonna be a cost maybe on this side when it used to be on this side, or it's gonna say something different on this side than it said, maybe it's gonna say seller paid commission to MyHomeGroup Real Estate for representing the buyer, like, I don't know how they're gonna say it, but it'll just be a different side of the ledger we'll get.
Yeah, it might have both. The buyer might,
Could
it
have
might say
contribution from
commission.
both,
Yeah.
for sure. For sure.
Andrew, I just don't see how it has to change, other than it can't be an MLS. So you sit down, you're taking a listing, and it's like, well, you know, co-broke, what would you like to pay? Because they're bringing the buyer, you know, blah, your whole spiel. And then they agree, so.
That's what I'm saying. I don't think it's gonna change that much.
Hmm.
I would still say 8 out of 10 sellers are probably still gonna offer some form of co-broke, once you explain it to them.
It's just more paperwork.
It's gonna be more paperwork.
And it might be unique.
We're gonna have, as a buyer's agent, we're gonna have to verify where that's coming from. We no longer have that guarantee on the MLS. No longer have that guarantee. And it's gonna be how do I put this delicately? We're gonna have to rely on our fellow agents to tell us the truth when we call them, right?
Yeah, that's the bummer part of it.
They have a responsibility, an ethical obligation for fair and honest dealings with all parties. So if you ask them a question that they have the answer to in writing from their sellers instructing them to do this, they have to tell you. They have to tell you.
So probably a good idea is to, hey, can you send me an email or a text with that verbiage?
You can ask your buyer, and we talked about this too last week. I would ask my seller, do you authorize me when they call me and they want to verify? So if you're offering 1%, let's just say you're offering 1%, and the buyer's agent says, I don't believe you. Right now, that document's confidential. I can't share that without the seller's permission. In my listing presentation, I would ask them, I'm going to put a line in here that says, upon request, you authorize me to show that section of the contract to the buyer's agent. Because they're going to ask me to verify it. And if I recommended 5 and you say you want to do 3.5 and give them 1.5, they're going to want to know, is that reality? And they can ask me to show them. And then I have to ask you, can I show them? So have that conversation up front so you don't have to ask every single time. It's in the contract.
The seller might do less depending on the offer. Like, they might feel different.
Yes, sir.
So I'm just going back to this question that I had. It says on line 35 that if after the 30 or 60 days that you have in this, if they enter into another buyer broker exclusive agreement, it subsequently.
Yeah, that's after expiration. So just like if your listing expires and you don't have a date in there, or it's 30 days or 60 days or 90 days or whatever it is, and it's not a house that you saw with them, they're of course they're free to go sign whoever they want. That's an after expiration clause. So if you have a listing agreement and you say that if a buyer comes that saw it up to 60 days after we expire, you still owe me a commission. That's the same principle. But it doesn't mean that another company couldn't come list it and sell it to a different buyer who never saw it and not owe you money. So it's the same thing. Like if you showed them that specific house during the buyer broker, but they go buy a different house with a different agent and yours is expired, they don't owe you a commission.
So, but if they buy the same,
if they buy the specific house, then they could have a problem. Yes,
Okay.
as long as it's within whatever expiration window you put in there.
Expiration window in there.
That's in the agreements, that's already a pre-printed line?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's an after expiration clause in listings and in buyer brokers because you have.
So the only thing about when we talk about why can't everything stay the same, the sellers have now heard about this, and they're aware of this situation. They've heard we don't have to pay commission anymore. So you have to have that conversation.
Well, and that's the whole point. You have to. This is what Aaron's going to talk about here as soon as I get off my soapbox. Is you have this whole thing is about having conversations with people. This whole thing. That's what the whole lawsuit's about. Is that the buyers don't know, the sellers don't know. That's what they're trying to say that we did. We didn't inform them. There was not informed consent, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The whole point of not having it on the MLS is now there has to be a conversation. There has to be a conversation with the seller. Here's why you want to offer co-broke. If you don't want to offer co-broke, that's your choice. But we had a conversation about the consequences because I can foresee it that I'm going to get a seller. We have 0 showings. Why do well, you have 0 co-broke. That's probably why you have 0 showings. Like, did you have a conversation with your agent? And if the answer is yes, then I'm like, well, what would you like me to do? If the answer is no, then I have a problem. You have to have that conversation explaining, here's the pros, here's the cons, what would you like to do? It's just a conversation. Same with the buyer. Here's the pros of having this agreement, here's why you want to have this agreement. If they're offering two, if it's a great client with a bunch of potential referrals, maybe, okay, I'll just take two, that's no problem. Or if it's a pain in the ass client, you showed 77 houses to and written 15 contracts and you're finally going to get paid and they want you to lower it, you're like, no, I'm not going to lower that. Just conversations.
And I know you probably can't answer this, but how are we going to deal with private remarks on listings saying, please contact listing agent for co-broke information, or is that going to be
I think anything that says co-broke in the MLS is going to get flagged. Anything.
So
It's just going to say, please
private
contact
remarks
listing
on-
agent with all questions.
Compensation?
Anything with anything with those words is going to get flagged.
Johnny Walker, just change it to whiskey. Call me about my whiskey. And then I'll be code for your question.
All right.
Dude, that's a great idea.
So here's the brand new one. As you can see, after expiration, they put it right up front. Okay? And here's the line: buyer acknowledges assigning more, blah blah blah. A bunch of liability, right? Not really much change there. They just changed where it is in the contract. So this is now a 3-page document. It was 1, then 2, now 3. So now it's outlining the agency relationship. That's not new. This is new. Broker compensation is not set by law, any board, association of realtors, multiple listing service, other than is negotiated between the parties. So you can have a retainer fee. You could always have a retainer fee. MyHomeGroup is trying to figure out how we can reasonably accept cash, check, Venmo for retainers. We understand that not everyone's going to want to write a check to MyHomeGroup. Problem is tracking, because it's just going to come in Venmo. I don't have an agreement attached to that, and the Department of Real Estate guidelines haven't changed for my supervision, so I still have to have some mechanism to track that. We're working on it, trying to figure that out. So we've thought about that already, how we're going to do that. The answer right now is I'm not sure. We have a QuickBooks link we could send out that would totally track everything, but then you have to call us every time. So we're trying to figure out the best way to do this. So we have thought about it though. So the broker compensation is any entity. So if they own an LLC and they sign this and they have the power to sign on behalf of the LLC, they still owe a commission. So just keep that in mind. So I don't really understand what line 41 is, because one's is percentage of gross purchase price or exchange of value. Exchange of value could be anything, right? I could give you a Ferrari and I want a percentage of that. Real estate doesn't have to be necessarily be all cash. Money or other. I'm not sure what the other is supposed to be.
Anything you want.
But then it says broker compensation shall be in U.S. currency. So I'm like, how is there another there? So I'm not really sure what that line is. Again, this is a draft, so they're probably going to change some of these things. But
yes, the gold bar.
So here's the important stuff right here, right? Seller or seller's broker may offer compensation. Buyer authorizes broker to accept compensation from the seller's broker, and it shall be credited. If seller or seller's broker offer compensation is greater than the buyer broker, broker shall be paid the broker compensation and the balance shall be credited to the buyer. So there's that. If seller or seller's broker offer compensation is less than broker compensation, buyer may request seller to pay the broker compensation as part of their offer. How we're going to do that, I'm not sure yet. Any broker compensation not paid by the seller or seller's broker shall be paid by the buyer. Here's a specific note about the VA that it can or cannot be completed. It'd have to be excluded from that because the VA cannot pay. That's something that's a VA not allowable at this point. Now NAR has petitioned the VA to change that. Johnny knows how fast the VA moves, and it's not very fast. So we could probably have this change, and then maybe in 2025, something like that, 2026. I'm not sure. They're looking at it. I don't know. So, there's always been a failure to complete, just like if a seller breaches the contract and intentionally torpedoes the deal by acting outside of the good faith of the contract, they still owe a commission. Same thing, if a buyer torpedoes a deal, they would still technically owe you compensation. Okay. listings, this is the part where we as agents need to uphold our fiduciary duty to the client. We have an obligation to show them any and all listings regardless of the co-broke, unless they click this box. And that was the verbiage that I had written into all buyer broker agreements. It says, buyer directs brokers not to show property listings unless the broker compensation has been advertised or negotiated to be paid by seller or seller's broker, or, I don't know who the or could be, but or. So that is the most important part of this. And if you want to have those conversations and you want your client to say, hey, if they're offering 0 and your buyer broker's 3, you don't want me to show that house. But you have to have that conversation. You can't just blindly click it. You can't send it to them clicked in a DocuSign. This is one of those forms. The ER and this form have to be sent separately under its own cover and explained. Otherwise, it could be non-enforceable.
So that's the full commission to be paid? Like if they're offering 1% and your buyer broker's 3, is that?
The broker compensation will be whatever is referring to whatever your buyer broker says.
But I'm saying you don't have to show up like that.
If it says, if it doesn't offer it and it's not being paid completely, then you don't have to show. You can say I'm not.
If it's not offering 3%, like it's, okay.
That's why I was asking if you have to individual, every single time you like write an offer on a property, if you have to do a new one of these. Because some co-brokes are 2.5, some are 3, some are.
It would just depend on your buyer and like what you want to accept from them. And again, this is going to be 62, 63 is something that's there for you guys to use. I don't know how often anybody would actually want to use that, but it's a conversation piece if you want to not have that conversation when they come up and just say, hey, I called them, there's no compensation on that, so moving on to the next one.
They're going to see it on Zillow or wherever, and they're like, why didn't you show me this house? It's going to be just over, you know.
I mean, it has to, again, this is 62, 63 is a very dangerous box to check. Because again, you owe your client a fiduciary duty, and so you're going to have to make that phone call, and you're going to have to call them back and say, hey, they don't offer compensation. You check that box. Technically, we don't. Do you want to see that? Do you want to pay compensation? Like, do you want to show that, knowing that you're going to have to pay it? So you're going to have that conversation every single time that it comes up where it's less than or 0. You're going to have that combo.
Can you elaborate on like the sent separately to be enforced?
So it can't be like, so if I send an offer package of like 37 documents, but included in that 37 documents, somewhere in the middle is this thing, it will not be enforceable. Like an attorney will get out of that one pretty easily. That it wasn't explained, which we have an obligation to, and it wasn't sent separately, so they didn't know what they were signing. Is an easy argument, and we've seen that happen, unfortunately. Yeah.
Can you show this in a listening appointment? This portion of it, yeah.
For sure. I would definitely use that as ammunition. Like it's right here. Like they can completely opt out of even seeing this one if you don't want to offer compensation. And that's again goes back to that conversation piece on your listing appointments that you have to have. And again, why we have that document. So we talked about compensation. You said yes, you said no, whatever it is, but you're agreeing that we talked about it.
Are you going to touch on, okay, seller, be prepared for, they're going to call the sign, and they're going to say, hey, I want you to represent me because my agent, you know, I don't want to pay my agent or whatever. How does that conversation look?
Well,
as far
again,
as somebody calling on the sign and
so
saying,
you can call, so you're talking about circumventing the buyer's agent, coming straight to so that's a conversation point to your seller because your agreement's with your seller. In lieu of, so if a buyer comes unrepresented, there is no cooperating broker, so there is no commission. So whatever I said in that first line is what I'm owed. So I'm owed 5%. It's up to me to delineate from that. So them coming direct doesn't automatically save them money. Okay? It just doesn't. That's a misnomer in the industry. I don't have to give them anything. Like it's 5%. It says only if there's a cooperating broker, only if your best interest, right? So I don't have to do that. Secondly, why would a seller want to either have an unrepresented buyer or single agent limited representation? So we have an obligation to explain that to our clients because we know this person, we know our seller, we've contracted with them, we've been working with them, we've established an agency relationship. Why would we all of a sudden want to say, but now this buyer's here and I can't tell you squat, I can only pass paper between the two of you and don't ask me for any help because I can't give you any.
For the seller you can, but not the buyer.
If the buyer, if it's limited representation, you can't. If they're unrepresented, you still could, but then then all the complications of, do they know how to do their inspections? Did they get a buyer advisory? I'm not gonna send them that because that's implied agency. So then it's liability that they come back after the fact and say, you know, you didn't tell me this, I didn't do this inspection, I didn't know I had to do this inspection, no one told me. And while
But wouldn't I be protected because I'm not representing you?
if you did everything
Buyer.
1,000,000% perfect and never crossed the agency lines and their attorney wasn't very good, yes. You'd be protected. That's why limited representation like that, when you've already have an established agency relationship with your client, it's not favorable to them. And that's why it's consent. There has to be consent to limited representation. They have to know what that means. And limited representation is never a problem until it's a problem. Then it's a real problem. It's a real problem.
I just went through it in an open house this past weekend, and I was doing an open house for one of our agents. Well, we're really good friends now, but I had a buyer come in and he didn't want representation. But he's like, but I want to make an offer on the house. And I'm like, well, I wouldn't advise doing that. He goes, well, I want to go directly with the listing agent so I don't have to pay, so you don't get the commission and I can use it towards. I go, it doesn't work like that. So we let him do what he needed to do. He went to get his pre-qual and he's like, I'm like, we need to get your pre-qual to make sure, you're valid first. And then he came back and he's like, you know what, you can represent me, just whatever you're getting paid, I want 1% of that. I said, it doesn't work like that. I said, you can call directly to the listing agent, and I kind of pre-warned her that he might be calling. I talked to one of the brokers here, we both did actually, and then needless to say, he's like, you can represent me, and I'm like, after I found out his pre-qual and he didn't want to release some information, I didn't feel comfortable. So I called the agent, I said, hey, I'm not going to do this. And I called broker, we talked about it, and she didn't want to do it either because he's not having representation.
Yeah.
She's a listing agent. Now she's got to deal with this guy that's not represented. It's a really uncomfortable situation. But I bowed out, whatever, she's going to write it up, we don't know where it's going to go. And, you could do procuring cause. We got into that conversation too. It just got really complicated real quick. And I like the other agent. We get along fine. I'm like, listen, I'm sorry to do this to you, but you can have him. And your lady's like, well, we'll work this out. But I mean,
he referred to the listing agent so she could give him a referral fee.
No, because she's representing the seller, and then
he wanted me to eventually
he's doing
represent
open house.
him and write the offer, and I didn't want to work with him. The further we got along with it, I didn't feel good about it, and I still had a conversation with her.
I understand.
So what I'm saying is, when you come in and they say I don't have representation, I don't want representation, I want to work with the listing agent. What's your guidance on that with this?
Well, that's not their choice. It's the seller. I'm under contract with the seller. And if the seller says no, then the answer is no. I can't represent you.
But if the seller says yes, then you could do agency instead of under the buyer section, unrepresented, and document the document.
His specific question was, I want to work with you as a listing agent.
Oh.
That's the seller's call.
Yeah.
The seller has 100% discretion. I don't get to decide if I'm a limited agent. I don't get to decide if I dual end things. That's not my choice. That's the seller's call to say, yes, I consent to limited representation.
But the listing agent could keep that buyer as unrepresented.
Theoretically, yeah. That's a hard line to walk.
I know.
That's a hard line to walk, because who's going to present the contract? And how are they going to get AAR forms? And how are they going to send a BINSR in? And how are they going to do everything that is in that contract that we told our client we would use? Mm-hmm. It's just a hard line to walk.
The listing agent has to write everything out.
It has to be a reverse offer. Like we've talked about that. Like the listing agent presents the offer to the buyer as, this is what my seller would accept.
Yeah.
Like, let me know what you think.
Well, it could be potentially the situation with mid-July. People coming in unrepresented and...
Don't get me wrong, like they've already seen all this, right? Yeah. They've all seen that. Even our own agents realtors are out there saying, oh, compensation's not allowed or co-broker's not allowed. That's not the case. It's not true. There's co-brokers still 100% allowed. There's nothing that's changed that. Mm-hmm. It's just how do we get it? How do we show that we got it, right? How do we memorialize it? That's the only thing that's different. Is how we got to that point. So, in that specific case, like again, it doesn't make any sense. If the seller truly wants them to be unrepresented, they got to realize I can't give them a discount because my liability just skyrocketed, and your liability just skyrocketed. Why would we want to give them a discount? Why would we want to give anything to the buyer and entice the buyer to get points? That's like me paying. That's like them paying the buyer to come be the buyer. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and all it does is increase my liability exponentially. Because now there's no one looking out for them. And the first person they're going to come find is us. That's how it always works.
Isn't it true that an unrepresented buyer is not covered by E&O insurance?
The buyer, I mean, they would have an E&O, but as a listing agent, we would still have potentially have E&O, yeah.
Oh, right, but I mean,
They don't have anything.
But if right, but if you had an agent and something occurred, then the E&O.
Well, the E&O only covers the agent, only covers actions specifically tied to a real estate transaction. So if there's like a non-disclosure, that's not covered under E&O. If there's anything, you don't tell them something transpires during the transaction. That's what I mean when I say if you do everything 100% right and you document it, then you can probably have an unrepresented buyer. But it's just really hard. It's really hard to walk that line, and I haven't seen anybody be able to walk that line 100%. Without at some point implying agency one way or the other. Because they ask you questions. They send you an email, right? Where do I get this?
It was getting the fine line, and I just decided.
Yeah, so it's really hard to not. It's like most of us want to help other people, right? And that's where we get ourselves in trouble because the line is clear, but if they ask us a question, like, oh, you go here. Well, what did I just do? I helped them. I showed them where that their buyer agent would have showed them, or I gave them something that was in the buyer advisory, or I provided them a document, and now they think they can rely on me, and I just implied agency. So unintentionally implied agency, but agency was still implied. So I'm gonna get through this real quick. None of this other stuff is really different. Everything goes through arbitration first, alternative dispute resolution before you can get to attorneys. It's all agreed to. Every one of our contracts is that way. Not to say that most people don't just strictly bypass this and go straight to attorneys, because they do, but technically they're supposed to go this route. And that's it. So that's 3 pages.
Can we get a copy of that?
What's that?
Is there a copy of that available?
There is not, Johnny, especially not for you. This is just a draft. I don't want to send this out. It's literally just a draft. The 2 things that I would highlight are that line about not showing properties is very important, and who's getting paid and how to get paid is very important. Those are probably the most specific changes that are pertinent to what we're talking about. So we could put it out there. I could put it in the mastermind group. I just don't want anybody using this because could not be the form. And if you use this or use language from there and it's not the form, then you might have an issue. So this is the old buyer broker. And there's the language that I wrote in. And now they put it in the contract.
I would think that I would want to check it, and as long as we've already agreed on an amount, and if the buyer is comfortable and is okay to pay it, I would want that checked, because if they're okay to see properties that are not offering anything because they already know what they're going to pay.
Well, like I said, this whole thing just comes down to conversations. Like, they got to know what they're signing. You have to be able to explain it to them. And you have to have a conversation about where the co-broke's coming from, who's paying the co-broke, who's doing what, et cetera, et cetera. That's one of the main points in what they wanted to accomplish with this lawsuit. Aside from making a crap ton of money from NAR and all the brokerages, that's what they said. We did. We colluded because no one knows what's on the settlement statement, which I don't understand how, because it's right on the ER what you're paying. And it's right on the buyer broker what you're paying. And it's on Realtor.com and Zillow.com what the co-broke is. So, I mean, those are all public-facing sites. So, what really got accomplished is we paid a lot of money, and now we're changing how we do business. I mean, does it really benefit a consumer? Arguable? I don't think so. I don't think it really benefits them in any stretch of the imagination, honestly. But Is there any other questions before I turn it over to Aaron? Yep.
So did we ever decide where the money, where it goes, once we call the listing agent and say they're paying, what is that?
We need a broker-to-broker compensation agreement.
Oh,
If the broker's paying it, we need a broker-to-broker compensation agreement, which we have already created. We've used them for years here at MyHomeGroup. So we already have it. It's in the back office. There's amended commission agreements. There's all kinds of different commission agreements. If you come across a situation where you need the represented seller compensation agreement, just email the broker department. We're not posting that because we're hoping that gets addressed somehow through AAR, but it could be available too if you need that right now.
And that gets signed by everybody, buyer, seller, everybody sees that, right? Yeah.
Have to, yeah.
Yeah.
Have to. Anything with money, as commissioner's rules for us to have informed consent of all parties have to have knowledge of it.
Is there any talk of getting rid of dual representation just to help with this?
Not yet. And that would have to come from state statute, and I don't think they're ever going to pass something like that. The commissioner can only abide by what's in the ARS. She can put out substantive policy statements, but that's not a law. That's just their recommendation, and then if you go against it and something happens, then you're going to get hammered. But it's not a law, so they're not going to do any laws on that. Because I asked specifically if she was going to change their auditing process to include buyer brokers, and she said no. And I called her about this. I said, how am I going to enforce this if it's not an auditing thing? I don't know how. There's not going to be like a listing, like if you know it's listed on the MLS because it's on the MLS. You're going to have to ask every single buyer if they sign one. There's nowhere to track that.
What do you think about if the seller is willing to pay something, but we still get a call, I want you to represent me. Would it be best to say, let me refer you to another agent? So that, let me refer you, another MyHomeGroup agent, or should it just be better to go with another
That's going to be the seller, excuse me. Talking too long. That's going to be the seller's choice, right? Because it's still limited representation.
Yeah, broker to broker, both MyHomeGroups, right?
Yeah, it's still be limited. So, and what agents don't understand is like when you call me about that, if they're both MyHomeGroup agents, I can only advise you what's in the contract. I can't give advice that favors one party over the other as the broker. Like I can only tell you, here's what the contract says. Ask you, here's what the contract says. Tell your client, ask them what they want to do. That's literally what limited representation means. It's limited. I can't tell you. I can't advise you. Mm-hmm. So it really, that's why it has to be consented to, because it really takes you from you're up here representing them, now you're down here just basically passing paperwork back and forth. So why would any seller want that?
Yeah.
I don't understand why they would want that. If they have a choice. Sometimes it's another agent that comes in and it just is what it is, right? Because we're at the same company. That just is what it is. But if they have a choice and there's an unrepresented buyer, they can say no.
I didn't realize that. I wouldn't want to be that agent to not be able to get my broker's full advice. That would make me.
It's tough. It's tough. It puts us in a tough spot.
Yeah.
Generally, the unrepresented buyers are the hard buyers you don't want to work with. They're unrepresented for a reason.
Well, they're looking for a deal, right? They're
Correct.
looking for something. They're 100% money and compensation motivated.
Correct.
And generally speaking, those people are the ones who got trouble.
Everyone stay away from that.
When are you do you have a date yet when you're gonna require us to have this?
Same as when the change happens, mid-July.
So with it not being like super enforceable, is it just going to be needed when an offer is submitted, or at what point should we be having this conversation?
At the same time you present an agency agreement, and technically speaking, none of us should be showing property without having that conversation about agency. So at the first substantive conversation about this, you should be getting a buyer broker sign that you're employing me to be your agent.
So like prior to the first showing?
Prior to, I know there's some programs out there like Zillow, Redfin that want you to show a house first, right? You can't even ask them if they're qualified. You have to go show the house. So that runs right into conflict with the new laws and regulations. So I don't know how Zillow or Redfin are going to overcome that. They're going to have to change that policy because this is the policy. And they're a member of NAR and they're a member of the MLS. So they're gonna have to change that policy as well. I don't know if they're going to, but I would just try to have this conversation definitely before you write an offer. And if you're on the second tour, you should probably have one. If you're on the first tour, you don't have one yet, you don't even know if they're gonna be your client, right? At that point, they might be, they might not be. They might want to work with you, they might choose someone else. But if you're on the second day, you better have one. You should get one at that point. Does anybody have any other questions before I turn it over? No? All right. Turn it over to Aaron.
Good job, Andrew. Every time. That's how it works.
Every time I'm long, I'm sorry.
You're just a big guy. It takes a long time to get all that out. All right, guys. So what I'm hearing, what was that?
Are you new here, sir?
Yeah, thank you. I've just started last week.
Thank you.
It's good to meet you. I heard you're famous.
Nice hat.
Thank you. I'm glad there's another cowboy hat in the crowd. It's sparkly. I'm going to put glitter on mine next time. It'll look good. What I hear is a lot of apprehension about the unknown, right? This is different. What's going to happen? How do we get there? And so that's my goal today, is to give you guys some stories, some background, some information to feel more confident about it and getting into those conversations. We had this class last week in Chandler. Was anyone here in Chandler last week for that? Not even you, Tay. See, you gotta come down there more.
I was there. I
The
was
what?
there. She was there.
You were there?
Yeah.
Well, why didn't you raise your hand and say I was
didn't
there?
even notice.
Way to pay attention. No, I see. See, now I called you out. You've been called out by the teacher. Now you notice. So we'll blaze through this. I know you guys have been here a long time. You don't want to hear me talk forever, so we'll give you some info. Hopefully I'm clicking the right thing. The reason that I'm doing this with Andrew is because we do this all the time in commercial. We negotiate it over and over and over again. I'm going to give you guys some examples about that, but I want to give you guys some goals. I want to give you guys some techniques and strategies that we've used to have these conversations. And then that way you guys are creating some value. We'll blaze through all this. We don't have time for all this for who's who, but just so you guys know, Aaron Dutcher, I run the commercial division for MyHomeGroup. I run a team of about 17 brokers. We're out of the Chandler office, and we've been at MyHomeGroup, I think, 6 years, 8 years, 7 years, somewhere in there. I'm really good with numbers. We've won a bunch of awards with MyHomeGroup and outside of MyHomeGroup. We like to think of ourselves as a superpower team. We've got a lot of great brokers there. The idea today, though, is to give you guys a goal. Identify what you're looking to do, get to your best case, get you guys some definitions, teach you guys to write it down, have these discussions, and then overall send you out there to the world so that you guys can get these commissions and know how to navigate it. So, here's where I like to start. What is that? I don't know what that is. Some say that's art. It's not my style of art, if you could guess. But I can do that. That's like this. How much would you pay for that art? Any takers? Nick, I know you'd pay a fortune for it. It looks right up your alley.
Oh, yeah.
That picture is actually from his bedroom.
Ah, I knew it. $315,000 for that piece of art. Who would pay that for that in this room? Anyone? Anyone got an extra $315,000 laying around for that? I don't. I don't like it. I wouldn't pay 50 cents for it. But beauty's in the eye of the beholder. What about this art piece? Anyone know this art piece? One of the most famous, right? Everyone knows this art piece. Any idea how much this sold for? Last time it sold? The original?
100? 190? 128.
Wow.
$1 billion.
$1 billion?
$1 billion. The last time that painting sold and traded, it was $1 billion. Now, what's the difference between those two paintings?
A lot.
Well, $1 billion, hopefully. One's famous, one's not. Someone valued one painting more than the other. Someone said, hey, you know what? This painting, I'm only willing to pay $300,000 for it, but this painting, I'll pay $1 billion. And that's where it comes down to in real estate. There's how many residential agents out there? A lot. How do you differentiate yourself from the others? They could just say, oh, you're just another painting on the wall. And all the paintings get 6%. No, they don't. Who here's been paid less than 6%? I have. Who's been paid more than 6%? I have. Right? This goes back to what Andrew was saying. There's no set standard. That's part of the problem that got here, is that idea of collusion, that it's 6%. No, it's not. It's whatever the deal is. There's some deals where we had an agent in our office work for tacos. Literally, he got a tray of tacos when the deal was done, and that was his compensation. And we've had compensation where we've got damn near $1 million in one commission. What was the difference? On the agents, the deal, what went into it, how it works. Anyone here remember the good old foreclosure days? Anyone getting always 6% on those? No. And those are some of the hardest transactions to do. But it was just what the market dictated. So, anyone know what this is? Johnny, you're old enough, you know what this is.
My birth certificate?
I like it. This is an old land survey. I like it because it's a survey that ties right into real estate, especially on the commercial side of things. Anyone can tell what that signature line is?
Hamilton?
Washington,
Wow.
founding father. So, did anyone know that before Washington was America's first badass, he was a surveyor? He was a surveyor, and this little, I don't know if you call it a parable or an idiom, I've tried to substantiate it. I don't think it's true, but it's a great story for what we're doing. George Washington's a surveyor. He's in West Virginia. West Virginia is beautiful. If you haven't been there, it's amazing. If there had more actual commercial real estate, I would even consider living there. But there's nothing in West Virginia except trees and beauty. He's in West Virginia. He gets hired by a landowner to survey 4,000 acres of land. He goes out there, he does the survey, and he comes back and he gives the landowner his invoice. And he says, here you go, it's $100. That's not a lot of money today, it's a shit ton of money then. He goes, well, this is ridiculous. All you did is walk around the land and put stakes in the ground. I don't think that this was worth it. I want an itemized invoice for everything you just did. So he takes the parchment back, scribbles through it, rewrites it, hands it back to him and says, here's your new invoice. What did the invoice say? Stakes, $1. Knowing where to put the stakes, $99. And that's what it's like for you guys. Have you guys ever had clients like, all you did is fill out some paperwork? I don't know why I'm paying 6% for that, or 3% for that, or 2% for that. It's because you know where it goes. Andrew was talking about how much paperwork you guys have to do. 37 forms? It's something crazy like that. That's one of the reasons I like commercial. We have like 3 forms in our thing. It's like an agency agreement, a PSA, and a closing document. Like, that's it. We don't have a Benzer, we don't have a disclosure, we don't have a market agreement, we don't have any of that stuff. You guys bring a ton of knowledge to the table. We're talking about those unrepresented buyers and they're crazy. Yeah, they're crazy. Because who would want to try and navigate that on their own? That's insane. There is so much you have to do there to know how to get from point A to point B. So part of this whole thing is to give you guys the confidence to have these conversations, know what value you're bringing to the table, because value is not always dollar for dollar all the stakes that are in the deal. So these are some of the things that you guys bring to the table that these guys aren't going to know on their own. So when you're sitting down with a buyer that wants to know, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Agent, I want to work with you, but why should I work with you in doing this transaction? Well, I know the standard practices in the market right now. Did the market shift? Absolutely. We were just talking about the foreclosure market. There was the short sale market. There was a ton of flips in the teens, and then the buying boom of 2020. You guys know what's going on in the market. You know how to navigate that with them. You know the rules and regulations. You know the real estate laws. Man, some buyer does not want to get themselves in trouble with fair housing. And we're a seller. Fair housing, man, they will nail you to a wall in 2 seconds. That's one of their favoriteest, easiest things to get you on. And they don't want to do that. They don't want to try and navigate that on their own. Market data, you have access to real awesome data and how to analyze it. That's important. And more importantly, anecdotal data. So that's the real-time, real information. Like when I get information on the commercial market and where it is and what it's doing right now, it's generally 3 months old. That's not huge, but that is a difference when I'm trying to negotiate something today. And a lot of times it's national. Well, that national news isn't what's happening in downtown Phoenix or in the suburbs of Chandler. But I have real-time, real market information because I'm in the trenches every day. You guys are in the trenches every day. You can advise them, hey, here's what I'm seeing. I've seen an uptick in buyer calls. I've seen an uptick in properties going on the market in this price range. I've seen that most sellers aren't willing to give you credit for this. Most sellers aren't willing to repair that. You guys have real information that can help a buyer navigate what's going on in the marketplace. And when you understand that and can sell them on the point that you've got stuff that's happening right now and can help them, more importantly, get over those hurdles when the troubled waters come, you know how to circumvent the potholes in the road, they're going to see value in that. And overall, that reduces risk, that reduces liability, and at the end of the day, they get what they pay for. So these guys that are the bargain seekers and the ones that are trying to get a bunch of stuff in there, yeah, many times, we see it all the time, you get what you pay for. There's a reason that there's a difference between a Hyundai and a Mercedes. And there's a difference in price. There's a difference in the paintings. You guys get to decide, are you a Van Gogh or are you a Honda? We'll figure it out. So, these are some of the value catchphrases I like to use when I'm negotiating these, because we negotiate these on every single deal before we even get started. Unlike residential, we don't have the MLS. We do, we can put stuff on the MLS, but most of our stuff goes on a website called CoStar. CoStar doesn't advertise commissions. So every single deal I do, the very first phone call I make is it available? Because unlike MLS, there's no penalty for leaving it up. So whenever you have a commercial client, you're like, man, I keep making all these calls, no one's calling me back. Well, because they probably don't exist. Because they can leave them up forever. And so it's a phone call right from the get-go. Is it available? And are you offering a co-broke? Those are generally my first two questions. And that's going to be what it's going to be for you guys. You're going to have to pick up the phone. I'm sorry. It's going to happen. No more order takers. No more just shooting an email. No more looking on MLS and letting it do all the work. You guys are going to have to be agents. You're going to have to represent them. I think this is going to be great for the industry, because I think it's going to get out a lot of people that don't take pride in their craft. It's going to get the people out that don't want to pick up the phone. It's going to get the people out that don't want to have the uncomfortable conversations, because you're just going to have to communicate. And it's going to be awesome. Because, like Andrew said, everyone's going to be playing by the same rules, having the same conversations, doing the same things. Just, can you do it better? That's the question. So these are the catchphrases I like to use. Performing the labor is sometimes the smallest part of the process to your profits. Again, sometimes they think, oh, well, you're just going to put it on MLS and you're going to make a few phone calls and that's all that's going to happen. No, there's a lot more to that. That was the slide before. Some of these other ones, you can get the deal done, but can you close the deal? That's one of my favorites, especially for these buyers that don't want to be represented or think they know that they can go out there and do it. Great, I'm sure you can find it. I'm sure you can talk to someone. I'm sure you could even probably get it under contract, but can you get it from contract to close? Do you know how to do the inspections? Do you have people on call? When you have to do the repairs? When you have to get the estimates? When you have to go through title? What happens if there's a cloud on title? What happens if there was a financing issue? You guys have that information. You know how to pilot them through that to get them to the end. I love that one. I use that with people all the time. We do a lot of development, and so I like this one. When it comes to real estate, the real work is in the negotiation room, not in the construction site. We're not going in there trying to get it under contract so we can renegotiate because the roof is bad. We're going to negotiate on the front end, and then if the roof is bad, we'll tackle that. You guys want to be in front of it right from the beginning. I'm going to negotiate you the best deal. Just like Andrew said, buyers that sell, or sellers that sell without an agent, sell for how much less? What was the percentage?
Like 13%.
13% less. And that's considering commissions. Nick and I just had this with one of our clients. He's a great client. He's an odd duck. Most business owners are. And he called us up and he's like, hey, you guys bought me this office 5 years ago. It's time to sell it. I want to move on. And that's kind of the time frame for commercial. It's usually 5 to 7 years because your depreciation schedule works out and people have to rotate it. So he calls up and wants to sell it. Great. Talk to him back and forth for 6 months. I want to sell. I gotta figure it out. Calls us up one day. He's like, hey, I'm super excited. My neighbor wants to buy my suite. I was like, that's awesome, John. We'll be happy to help you out with that. He's like, well, will you do it for less because I already have the buyer? No problem. We have this happen all the time in commercial. A lot of times people just line up, but again, they don't know how to get it from contract to close. So we come in the middle and then we work it out and we take care of the transaction. So we finally go another few months of back and forth, and he finally sets up a meeting with this potential buyer. He has me show up and he's so excited. I'm so excited we got this done. And we negotiated down on the commission. So we ended up doing the commission for 2%. So he was so excited because it wasn't 6. And because he got the buyer, or we didn't get the buyer, it wasn't 4, but it was 2. He was like, oh man, this is amazing. So this property, we sit down at the table and he starts lining out the terms, the price, all what's going to happen. He put that price so low and the terms so long, and he was so excited because he saved, what's 1% on 600,000, $6,000, and he sold that property at least $60,000 under market.
Oh.
But so excited about the $6,000 he saved and not having to do the commission, right? And I was like, John, you could have got so much more for this. He's like, no, this is a great deal. I saved all my costs. They're going to move in. Great. As long as he's happy, he's happy. But if we could have gotten in front of that, we could have got him, even after everything was done, like $54,000 more on his sales price. So you guys add value. You also add a lot of stuff that you can't see that's on the bottom line with the profit, and that's where caca comes in. You guys deal with all the caca. You're the counselor, the advisor, the confidant, and the advocate. Does that sound right? Anyone deal with those sellers, buyers? You are. Buying a home is one of the most stressful things they can do. And you've done it a million times. That's one of the best things you can bring to the table and be like, guys, this is not my first rodeo. I got you. It's going to be tremendously difficult. It's going to be stressful. There might be a point where you want to divorce your wife and get rid of your kids, but you're not going to, because I'm going to walk you through the process and it's going to be awesome. I'm going to be here for you. I'm going to be your counselor. I'm going to go to bat for you. I'm going to be your advocate. When you have a problem, I want you to bring it to me and know that you're safe with me because I'm going to be your confidant. And when it's all said and done, just know that we are going to get this over the finish line because I'm your advisor. Man, they love that. I've got a client that's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. We represent a huge building for him in Phoenix. And he will even call me up and be like, all right, I need a counseling session. And 10 minutes of our call is about just calming him down. Just getting him to walk away from the edge of the cliff he's about to jump off because he can't take all the pressure of all the moving parts in his building. And then 5 minutes is what we're going to do to fix it. But the first part of it's getting him to just, all right, breathe, it's okay, we're going to get you there. That's the caca. You guys deal with the caca, and guess what? You get paid for it, just like any other counselor or advisor should get paid for it. That's part of your value. I love Rocky. Rocky's one of my favorites. I'll watch the movie every time. And all 7 of them are the exact same movie. Yes, I know. They're just a little scripted different. But this is one of the best quotes of all time. And this is just the front end of the quote. If you know what you're worth, then go and get what you're worth. Don't be afraid to have the conversation. That's the big key about everything in this class today is have the conversations. And when you have the conversations, your clients love it. They love when they know what's going on. They love when they're explained what's happening. And they love to pay someone what they're worth if you do it. The flip side of that is you better do it. Because if you don't, then that's where the problems happen. You want to make good on what you do. And if you do it well, guys, pat yourself on the back a little bit. Toot your own horn. Tell them how good you are. Because no agent's going to come behind you and be like, oh man, I just saw Tay walking out of your house. That agent's awesome. I'm not even going to come in. You should work with her. She's amazing. I've seen her do deals that couldn't even get done before. No one's gonna do that for you but you. So you have to have that conversation. So, how do you have those conversations? I'm an old Boy Scout. Anyone else in here Boy Scout? There we go. Got Girl Scout, we'll take it. I think the organization's dead now. I think my son was one of the last Eagle Scouts to ever get through there. But be prepared. Be prepared, whether it's the buyer, whether it's the seller, and you're going to have these conversations about the commissions. No, co-broke still exists. Talk to them. Tell them what those surprises are going to be. Tell them about, hey, we might have an unrepresented buyer walk in the door and try and circumvent someone, or that doesn't want to have an agent. Let's have those conversations. We might need to negotiate on the commission. Here's what that might look like. Give them as much information as possible. We're going to tie it back to another old founding father, Benjamin Franklin. By failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. I don't know if he really said it, but the internet said so we're going with it. You need to be prepared. Go into those conversations with your list of questions, with the list of values you bring to the table. Write it down. There's no problem having notes in there and going through your notes. Be in front of those buyers, be in front of those sellers, and be prepared. I have an agent, actually she's right back here, Audra. She damn near stalks people before she talks to them. She'll come in, she'll tell me she went through their Facebook, their LinkedIn, their Instagram, she knows what their business is, what their incomes are, blah, 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 blah. Because she's prepared. She wants to be able to talk to those people, know what they're looking for, what they're doing, and how to get there. So, you're prepared, what do? Get FaceTime, guys. I'm telling you, especially with these changes, get FaceTime. You're so much more powerful doing a listing agreement in their house. Why? Because you see where they live, you see what the house is, you know how to market it, maybe there's some amenities there you weren't aware of, so now you know how to price it effectively. Maybe there's some problems you weren't aware of, so you know you need to drop the price effectively. Well, the same thing with the buyers. Get them for FaceTime. Make them show up somewhere or meet with them, especially if they're trading houses. If they're trading houses, if they already are in a rental or a house, see their house, know what works for them. Because when they say, I need a big kitchen, well, what's a big kitchen? A big kitchen to someone might be, just half an area bigger than what it is. Some of them might have a galley kitchen, it's this big and they're trying to squeeze through it. Anything's going to be bigger than that. They just want a kitchen at that point. But they might have the Taj Mahal of kitchens, and you're like, oh shit, I don't know how we're going to get a bigger kitchen unless you increase your price point by $2 million. Like, we're just not going to get there. But you can have those conversations. But you can't have those conversations over a phone call. If you're taking those buyer interviews over the phone, tell them how awesome it is they called you, you love it, you're honored that they would meet with you, but it would be best if you can come and see where they're at currently so you can best represent them going forward. We do that with our buyers all the time because they have businesses and we need to know what those businesses look like, what they run like, and what they need to continue to run like if we're going to move them. If I've got a manufacturer and I go into his building and all of a sudden I notice, whoa, they've got way bigger equipment than I expected, we're going to have to increase our clear height to find him the right place. I wouldn't know that if I wasn't in his building and seen a shop. And guess what? People generally love to show off their houses. They generally love to show off their businesses. What's the favorite thing people love to talk about?
Themselves.
Yeah, let them talk about it. Get in front of them. Have those conversations. Do your research. Have the conversations. And then ask them all those questions. Hey, I saw your business did this last year. That's awesome. Tell me about it. I saw that you guys, Facebook's talking a little bit. I saw you guys just got back from Rome. That sounds fantastic. How was it? They're going to be like, wow, okay, awesome. Yeah, I'd love to talk about my fancy trip I went on. Find the information, get the FaceTime, get in front of them. And then there's another big key component to getting in front of them. How much of our conversation is verbal and how much is body language? I don't know the exact percentage because I forgot to put that on here, but it's a lot. The body language is more than our conversation. It's huge. Someone can act super friendly on the phone and give you a ton of lip service, and on the other end of the phone they're like, they don't want to listen to you at all. They're not going to do that in person though, because you're going to see it. And then you're going to know, they'll be like, hey, you know what? And you can read the body language. I dealt with a client once years ago She was a phone call Karen. Anyone had a phone call Karen? Where she was just bitchy as all get out on the phone. Like, I'm like, this broad doesn't like me. And she is so rude on the phone. But every time I get in front of her, she was like, oh, Aaron, you're so great. And it's so good to see you again. I'm like, you just like ripped my ass yesterday. Like, I don't understand this at all. So guess what? I quit taking her phone calls. I just met her in person. It was great. We got the deal done. Get FaceTime. It pays dividends in so many different ways when you're negotiating. And then listen, Linda, listen. Again, what do they like to talk about? Themselves. Ask them a million questions. What do you like about your house? What don't you like about your house? Where would you like to be? Where wouldn't you like to be? Ask all the find out questions you can. And if you get them talking and they really get talking, they're going to tell you all the answers you ever needed to know and then some. Especially when you get into the commission part. When you start talking about that, you just let them talk. And we'll give you some catchphrases for that too that you guys can use.
Can I add one thing to that?
Absolutely.
The other thing that's vital, especially like if they're going into a seller's house, look at their pictures on the wall. Look at what their kids do. Is there baseball stuff, something that you have in common with them? Find some commonality. Sorry, I didn't mean to get
No, you're perfect. Look at that. You're the guru here. You know it. Johnny's been around long enough, he knows all the tricks. You find the similar principles. If they got military photos on the wall and you've been in the military, connect with that. That's huge. They have cars on the wall and you're a car guy, do it. They have horses on the wall, you're a horse girl, do it. They got kids, relate. Everyone's got fur babies, right? I don't know almost anyone that doesn't have some sort of fur baby. Relate. Find the similar principles and anchor in on those. Because people do business with people they like. No one goes, this guy's an asshole. He drives me crazy every day, but I guess I'll work with him. No, they want to do business with people they like. And if you can relate to them and find those similar principles, you can anchor in on that, and then you can always go back to it. Find those ties.
There's also stuff you can look for, especially today, like if you go into somebody's house and they got a Trump sticker someplace, probably not a good idea to start bad-mouthing Trump. I'm not trying to get political. I'm just saying that's like a
easy thing.
Don't talk politics if you don't.
And you can't see that over
Even
the phone.
if you agree with them, don't talk politics.
Yeah, don't bring it up. You skirt away from those things. You can find out real quick. And then tone. I know we're trying to rush through this, so I'm a little bit flamboyant and I'm a little bit fast and we're talking things. Don't go in there and be like, oh my gosh, I love your house and this is so cool. And then I saw this thing over here and then, oh my gosh, you got kids and and you're so hectic and excited because you're nervous and you're excited and the adrenaline's running. At the same time, don't be like, yeah, it's all right house, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I've seen better. You know? Have a good tone. This is my pilot voice. This is why I say, when you come in to fly, you guys hear this with pilots all the time. How do pilots sound on the plane? They're not frantic, right? They don't sound scared. You want a scared pilot on the plane or someone that's super adrenaline? You don't want that squirrel voice. When the pilot comes on, if I called up ATC and I'm landing in Scottsdale, I'm like, hey, ATC, 496 kilo golf, and yeah, we're excited today, and I think we're going to land on runway 21. Are we clear to land? Let's see. They are going to be like, dude, get off my airways. You're blocking everything. This doesn't work. But you use your pilot voice and you come in and you're like, Scottsdale Tower, this is 496 kilo golf. We are approaching for clear and final, runway 21 with Romeo. They love that. Your clients love it too. When you're talking to them, don't get frantic. Don't get worked up. Don't get scared. Don't get overzealous or underzealous. Have that, cool jazz, KYOT, nice voice. Make them feel warm and fuzzy. There's a reason those tones work. So, you've got all those things. We kind of talked about anchor there for a minute. Get into their hopes and dreams. What do they want? Why are they using you? Why are they calling a broker? They want a bigger house. They want a smaller house. They want a bigger mortgage, a smaller mortgage. They want to be closer to their kids' school. All their kids are out. They want to be closer to retirement. What are their hopes and dreams? That's part of that listening, finding out, being prepared. You can go through all that and find out what those dreams are, and then that's what you're going to continue to loop back into the conversation. Why? Because you're the kaka. You're their advocate. You're the confidant. You're the one that they're going to come to and get advice from. So you have to know what the dream is so that you can remind them of it when things get hairy, because how many deals go smooth and perfectly all the time? I don't think we've had one this year. Maybe you get one a year, maybe you get two. If you're Johnny, they're all of them. They don't go smooth and perfectly. There's gonna be problems. So, how do you get through those problems? One, because of your knowledge and because of your information and how good of an agent you are, you're gonna help them circumvent that. But you're also gonna remind them of the hopes and dreams. That client I was telling you about, I have to walk him off the cliff about every week. He wants to retire. He wants out of this property. He wants to move on. He wants to golf for the first time in like 2 years. So I always remind him, hey, don't worry about it, Bill. We're going to get you done. You're going to be on Pebble Beach in no time. You're going to be golfing. You're going to be able to spend more time with your wife. It's going to be great. He's like, I know. We're getting there. Oh, man, I can't wait to hit the greens again. Absolutely. I don't leave him without having some power of what his hopes and dreams are on the phone. We've got another client right now. They're kind of wavering a little bit. They're like, oh, I don't know if I want to move, and the timing. And I'm like, Daniela, you don't want to keep sitting in traffic all day. You've told me this property is going to be cut 45 minutes off your commute. Just think about that when you're driving to work tomorrow. You don't want to do that? Let me take care of it. You need to back off a little bit. You don't need to be as involved. I've got you. I'll give you some updates when they come. And just think about how much more time you're going to be able to spend with your family because you're getting home earlier. Bam! Lock in those power hopes and dreams. See what they are. Write them down. Keep them so you can use them. So, this one comes back with the commissions and the people and talking about everything. This is a phrase I use all the time. What's equal isn't always fair, and what's fair isn't always equal. People love to say this, or say that, no, it needs to be fair. It needs to be equal. No, they're not the same. Equal and fair are not the same. This little picture gives you a great example of it. Equal is everyone gets one box. Is that fair? Not in this scenario. So when you're talking to them and you're trying to figure out what's equal and what's fair, and they say, well, you know, Taya came in and she said she's willing to do it for 2%, and I think it would be fair if everyone was equal. That's great. Taya's a great agent. I think she's phenomenal. I love everything she does. But here, let me tell you why I'm so great and why I deserve 4%. And then you go into what you do. I never badmouth another agent when I'm trying to negotiate a deal. If they say that Nick came in before you and that he sounds like a better broker, great. Maybe I know Nick, maybe I don't. That's awesome. I'm glad you had a really good experience with him. They try and use him to pit you against them on commission. I don't know his business. I don't know what he does. But let me tell you what I do. This is why I'm worth what I'm worth. This is why I do what I do. Just because someone else is willing to work for 1% or a flat rate doesn't mean you have to. And vice versa. Maybe they come in and they're shooting for the stars, like, I want 10% on this deal. And they come in, they're like, why are you only charging 6? Something seems off. This is what I do. This is what I charge. This is how my business works. Know how to have those conversations. Know that it doesn't have to be equal to be fair. And then use fair to your advantage. I love using what would be fair to you. It is like the best phrase ever, because again, everyone's idea of fair is different. You don't know. We all make assumptions on what would be fair. What's fair for someone isn't the same that's fair for others. So you don't want to say it in a defensive way. You don't be like, well, that's not fair. Okay, we're not trying to start a fight here or an argument. And you don't want to be like, well, we've given you a fair offer. No, do it in a positive way. I want you to feel like you've been treated fairly. So, what would work? I do that with clients all the time when we're negotiating commissions. Because for us, it happens in the letter of intent, which is right at the beginning of the negotiations. We have properties. Every property's different. There's no boilerplates for us. There's no contracts for us. I love when we get a broker hotline call and they're like, I need a contract for a lease. I'm like, there isn't one. It all is deal specific, property specific. And so part of that is the commissions are specific. So our commissions fluctuate depending on the market, depending on the type of use, depending on where it is. So like today, if I go to downtown Phoenix on an office building, I could probably get 8 or 10% one side. If I go to that same office and I go to Gilbert where there's no vacancy, I'm getting 3 or 4. Different marketplace. If I'm doing industrial, 10 years ago, it was for sure 8% one side. If I do industrial today, I'm lucky if I get 3. They just don't need it. So it's knowing that marketplace and what to negotiate and how that works. So that when we're negotiating those and when you're negotiating these with your buyers or your sellers, and you say, you know what, for what I do, and this is all I've done, you've explained all this stuff, you've done all your research, you put it all together, and you sit down and you're like, well, what commission sounds fair to you? Let them take the first shot. I tell my team all the time, don't give them the bullet to shoot you with. If you come in and you're like, I'll do it for 3, and they're like, whew, I was willing to pay 8. She came in low. That's fantastic. You don't know their barometer. You don't know where they're at. Don't give them the bullet to shoot you with. What would be fair? What would you feel would be a fair commission for my services now that I've explained everything to you? Bam. Let them throw it out there. Now, if they come in at, well, I think you're worth 1%. Wow. I mean, I've told I've had a high opinion of myself sometimes, and I thought 6 was fair, but 1's a really low opinion. What could I do to make that better? Go through the process with them, but ask them, what would be fair? And this is also really good in negotiating when you're on the opposite sides of it. And instead of going like, we've given you a really fair offer, I don't see why you're accepting it. Be like, you know, we put an offer together that we thought really confident about. We put our best foot forward. What do you feel would be fair to get this across the finish line? You'll be amazed what people will tell you when you put it in a good way like that. We'll blast through a few of these. I know time's up, so we'll get going. Anyone need to bail out? Okay, we'll rocket fire these. Being asked for them to make a decision too soon, people get defensive. Don't rush the conversation on the commission. You'll get there. Know that that's the finish line. Enjoy the journey on the way there. You're going to find out a lot about your client. But start with getting some of those no's so you can get to some of the yeses. You want people to agree with you. You want them to be like, yeah, that's right. That's part of that finding similarities. You go in there and you do see the Trump sticker and you're like, man, go Trump. And they're like, yeah, that's right. Boom, you're locked in. Get some of those similarities going, but get some of the yes and no's out of the way. You know, what about this doesn't work for you? Okay, Mr. Client, I work for 3% for this buyer broker. Or, sorry, you've already had the conversation and you get to the 3%. You're like, hey, we're okay, cool, we've got to the 3%. If I find a property that's not offering that, are you willing to do that? Or to pay the difference? No. Okay, what about that doesn't work for you? I just don't have the money. Okay, then we need to have a conversation. But you can't have that conversation if you don't bring it up. If you just make assumptions that they just don't want to pay you, they do have the money, but then they really don't have the money, get into the no's about what doesn't work for you. Or you're having that conversation about the commission and they shoot out the 2 and you're like, wow, I feel that that's, you know, a fair offer on your end, but I work for 6. Would you be willing to do it for 5? And you agree to 5. And they're like, well, no, I don't think I could do it for 5. Well, what would you need to make that work? Oh, well, I guess if you were doing open houses every weekend, I could make that work. And then you agree to that or not. But ask some of these questions to get through those conversations to find out where you want to be. So, kind of getting them to say no 4 times. This is one of my favorite questions right here. How am I supposed to do that? When they say, I'm only willing to pay you 2%. Okay, how am I supposed to do that? What? Put it back on them. Don't jump into, well, you know, I do a lot of work and I do these listing programs and then I'm on these house tours and then I do an open house and I put my signs out and I'm doing the marketing. No, don't go into your laundry list. Don't even go there. Okay, how am I supposed to do that? Let them explain it to you. It's awesome. Sometimes they'll get there for you. Well, I guess that is pretty low, and I know the market's going up and inflation's crazy. Yeah, I guess 2% is kind of hard. I mean, I guess I could pay you 3. That offer's very generous. I'm sorry, that just doesn't work for me. Well, you know, if you promise to do X, Y, Z, then I could do it. And then you either decide, I'm afraid I can't do that, or yes, I can. You don't have to take every offer. Because as we talked about some of these clients, you don't have to take every client. Not every client's good for you. I tell my team all the time, get rid of these guys. Some people are time wasters, time sucks, and they're just going to get you in a lawsuit. But remember this question, how am I supposed to do that? Even when you're in the negotiation table, if they ask you to do something stupid that you know is going to burn a bridge on the other side, ask them, how am I supposed to do that? Well, you know, my ethics and my rules as a real estate agent says that don't get into that. Don't get into the explanation, just say, how am I supposed to do that? It's fantastic. If you take anything away today, take that. Anytime that they do stuff that is good, you want them to get to stuff, especially if it's coming from you. Oh, that's very generous of you. That's more than fair. Thank you for taking the time. Use those words with them, those phrases, and vice versa. Labels. Just like when I came up here and started this conversation, I didn't come up here and said, man, you guys are a bunch of scaredy cats. I don't know why you won't have these conversations. No, I said, man, it sounds like we have an issue with conversations. Sounds like we need to talk about how to have these conversations. Don't come in and tell people what they are. No one likes to be told who they are. But if you say it looks like, it seems like, it sounds like, it's a much more powerful conversation, especially when you're talking about commissions. And they say, well, I guess I could pay you 2%. You go, okay, how am I supposed to do that? Well, I just, figured that that's what you would work for. And you could say, well, it sounds like you're looking for someone that works at a different rate than what I do. Let me explain to you how I work. Couple all of these things together. You don't want to tell them, well, man, you're just cheap. That doesn't work. So you say it in a nice way. Well, it sounds like you're looking for an agent that goes at a cheaper rate than I do. That's not my business model. I know I bring a lot more to the table. And explain it to them with those labels. You want to get to the that's right. We were talking about that a little bit, but you paraphrase it. Use pauses. Guys, pauses are so powerful, especially if you've countered them on something. I have a rule in my head. I say every time when I'm in a negotiation with someone, whether it's even my wife or my kids, and we're trying to figure something out, if it gets to the point where I've made an offer or an ultimatum, I don't talk. I say in my head, the next person who talks loses. And I tell myself that every time. And in a negotiation, 10 seconds can feel like 10 minutes. You're like, oh. But we want to rattle off, and we want to tell them why, and we want to give our explanations and how we add value, and blah, 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 blah. And we talk ourselves out of the deal. If you've made an ultimatum, or you've said, you know what, that's a really generous offer, but I only work for 4%. Wait. See what they say. You don't have to jump into it, especially if it's silent for 10 seconds. Don't be like, are you still there? First thing you can say, you know they're still there. Did I offend you? No, don't say that. Just say, okay, well, I've thought about it, and yeah, maybe I can do that. Or I can't. And then you're at an impasse, and you move on. And that's fine. But pause. The next person who talks loses. I say that in my head all the time. A lot of this is talk less, listen more, honestly, at the end of the day. But give them encouragement. Mirrors are awesome. Is that our next slide? Yes, mirrors. All right. This is the Jedi mind trick. This one works all the time. It can get repetitive, and then it gets weird, so don't overuse it too long. But you just repeat the last 3 things they said. When you're like, so, are you ready to sign this listing agreement? And they go, well, I've been thinking about it, and I think I'm going to look for an agent that works cheaper. You're going to look for an agent that works cheaper? Well, I've talked to a lot of agents, and I think you're really knowledgeable, and it's been great to meet you, but, I think I can save some money out there. So you're looking to save some money? Well, I mean, it's not that I'm cheap. I mean, this is a great house. It's just, I don't know if we're the right fit. We're not the right fit. You just cycle that. They will talk themselves out of it all the time. Use this with your wives. They will hate you, but you will get what you want. Just remember that. Kids, it's awesome. Oh, it's time for bed. Oh, I got homework. I can't go to bed. You've got homework? Well, see, my teacher gave me extra homework at the end of the day. Dude, you just work it. Finally, like, I got nowhere to go. Time to go to bed. Use that with them. If you're in an abrupt situation where you have to use it, just cycle it. Last 3 words, whatever they said, whatever the rebuttal was, you don't have to have the answer to the rebuttal. They don't want to hear about, at this point, the market and your expertise and everything else. You're just rebuttaling. And it is, oh, so you can't pay 6%? Well, I didn't say I can't pay 6%. I just don't want to pay 6%. Oh, so you don't want to pay 6%? Well, I mean, the house is really good. Just cycle it. Mirroring's awesome. Okay, this is the last one I'm going to leave you with because we're way over time, and I think there's like 5 more slides, but it's all good. Calibrate questions. Remember, the listener has control of the conversation. Remember what I was saying about pausing, listening, letting them talk more? You'd be surprised how people will talk themselves into a deal or talk themselves into paying you a commission. It is the best thing you can do. The goal to suspend unbelief, just have the questions, have the conversations. The biggest takeaway from this is talk to your clients. Like Andrew was saying, like, that's the client's decision. I can't tell you how many times we've had it where I know the broker on the other side has not even had 2 seconds to ask their client about what we proposed. And I'm like, is that what your client said? Well, it's what they're going to say. Well, how about you present it to them and then we'll see what they say. We had one earlier this year. We could not get over the fence. Like, we could not get any traction. So finally, we just sent the LOI to the client and the agent at the same time. Like, here you go. And guess what? They signed it. Because the agent wasn't submitting it. For whatever reason, he was not getting in front of it. So, use the skills that you have to have those conversations. Avoid questions that could be answered with yes or no. Start with what and how. All these things are good. You guys are good. You guys are phenomenal. And if you will have the questions and have the answers and talk to your clients, they're going to love you for it. They want someone that's going to be the caca and deal with it. That's what you do. And at the end of the day, they will pay you for it. People pay for services that they feel are good. Anyone ever see someone pay a fortune to get their nails done? I do, because it shows up in my bank account twice a month. It blows my mind. I'm like, I know there's a girl down the street that'll do it for $40. My wife's like, yeah, but she's no good.
I'll do it for
and the
free.
conversation with Mary is way better. So Mary gets about $120. So if you're good, you'll get paid for your services. One of the best ones that I've had is we had a deal. We were negotiating a contentious lease deal on a building. And it took months. It went for like 5 months, 6 months. And at the end of the day, it wasn't huge, but it was a decent sized deal. I think it was like $2.4 million when it was all said and done. And the commissions on that are 6% one side. It was office building, and that's what they were paying at the time. So it was a good commission. We went through it, super contentious, one of the hardest transactions I've probably ever had. But the moral of the story is I got done with the transaction, and my client went, you know what? I have never seen someone handle something like that. I'm going to give you a 1/4 point bonus. 1/4 point bonus doesn't sound too exciting, except when it's on 2.4 million. So it's like, hey, I will take that. Thank you very much, sir. That's awesome. People will pay you when you bring services to the table. Don't be an order taker. Don't just sit back and wait for the stuff to come in. Be a broker or an agent. Sorry, I used to say brokers. But be an agent. Be their agent. Just think of how you would deal with it if you were Jerry Maguire. Show me the money. You're going to go fight for them, right? Fight for your client. Show them the value. Have these conversations. And when you do this, I promise you, the commission conversation's not that scary. Number one, everyone's gonna be having it. Number two, when you come prepared for it, they're gonna love it. Oh, speaking of come prepared for it. Okay, cheat sheet. It's the last thing, I promise, we're getting out of here. This cheat sheet, it's for everything. Like I said, this isn't just commercial, this isn't just real estate. I use this when I have to negotiate stuff with random things, like getting my car fixed or buying a horse. Like, you can use this with everything. Actually, I don't know why I'm walking around. Can you pass that around?
You're almost done here.
I'm almost done. Write it down. So many people go into these conversations without writing anything down. The first time I ever used this sheet, we sold how much was that inline retail in Apache Junction, Nick?
3.7.
So we sold a $3.7 million inline retail building. 3 owners, 2 of them are real estate agents, and one of them is the one that brought us the deal to sell her own building and wanted a referral on it. Okay, no problem. We can do that. What did we know was going to happen when we got